listening to Sasquatch Syndicate.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard.
And all the ape believers don't want any of the paranormal believers to say anything because they're all whacked and screwed up and we don't want them. And all the paranormal believers don't want to go to the ape believers saying, well, you're all closed-minded. You're not open to the fact that it does this and it does that.
And I look over my left shoulder and this creature is running through the woods and it's bulldozing the brush down. And I knew, man, this thing is going to get me.
Welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate. I'm your host Chuck out in Seattle, Washington, along with Paul in Portland, Oregon. Thanks to everyone for listening and those following us at SasquatchSyndicate.com and on our social media outlets. Before we get going tonight, a quick shout out to all the mothers out there, and we really hope you had an amazing Mother's Day. And for all those out there listening, we certainly hope everyone had a chance to thank or remember their mothers this past Sunday. Also, I wanted to do a quick shout out to Ben Mintz in Baltimore, Maryland, and a few others out there that wrote into the show and mentioned they're out there struggling and our show helps keep them going. It's really great to hear, and I just wanted you to know that we really appreciate you out there listening. And for those out there struggling, try to keep your chin up. I sincerely wish Paul and I could tell you that every night at 5 p.m. We just check out of the studio, jump on a catamaran, and sip Mai Tais, watching the sunset while the ukulele plays. But that isn't really reality here either. So we just want you to know you're not out there alone, and many folks out there are struggling. So hang in there, my friends, and let's just tackle this one day at a time. We're going to be going fast forward tonight. With us on the podcast is the legendary Ron Morehead, and while Ron is very well documented and published for his work with the Sierra Sounds, Ron's been researching this phenomenon a long time, and so we're going to get to share Ron's views on some very interesting alternative theories on different attributes that come up from time to time on this subject. But first, some business. This episode of Sasquatch Syndicate is brought to you by Amazon.com and our new friend Alexa. So I know what you guys are thinking. Geez, guys, isn't it bad enough the government's already tapping your lines and following your every move on Sasquatch or Bigfoot? Well, hey, you have to break some eggs, right? And if this little device opens up our homes to the CIA and the NSA listening to our every move, and ultimately Skynet and AI take over the world, I guess you can say I told you so. But in the meantime, please enjoy the sweet joy of the Amazon Echo, Dot, or Tap, and the laziness of no longer having to look something up or even have to search your phone to play your favorite podcast. Just simply say, Alexa, play podcast Sasquatch Syndicate, and see what happens. One of my favorite attributes of Alexa is just getting off of work and laying on the couch and really deciding after a long day if I should get up and go to the gym or just lay around like a crusty old cave dweller and order me some Grubhub. But now, while you decide, you can ask Alexa to play you the sweet sounds of your favorite music mix. So how does Amazon support the podcast? Really simple, my friends. You can donate to the podcast without spending a dime. All you have to do is go to SasquatchSyndicate.com, click donate, and then click our Amazon link before you start shopping. Amazon will give us a small percentage of your purchase. It costs you nothing. So super simple and an easy way to support the podcast. Also, of course, you can buy merchandise at SasquatchSyndicate.com under our store. And so if you have time to pick up swag, please do so. All right, so enough business. Onto the podcast. With us tonight on Sasquatch Syndicate is Ron Morehead. Ron is a resident of Sequim, Washington. In the early 1970s, Ron was part of a group of hunters who annually packed into a very remote area of the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. During these trips, the team began getting evening visitations from a family of creatures that left huge five-toed footprints. Ron's research has taken him into almost all parts of the world. He has produced 2 CDs, which captures the story and also includes the creature's vocalizations. His book, Voices in the Wilderness, was produced in 2012 and chronicles his 40 years of research. His new book, Quantum Bigfoot suggests the science behind many of the reported mysteries that surrounds these beings. So Ron, welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate, and if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your background for our listeners and really how you got into this phenomenon.
Yeah, Chuck, it began for me in 1971. I was part of a hunting group, and the hunters ran across, two of them anyway, heard some real aggressive sounds out by the stove inside their shelter. This shelter is located about 8 miles back in the wilderness of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and a very remote, very inaccessible area you get to. But they came out and told the rest of us that they heard something up there, and they saw this huge footprint, and it wasn't a bear. So it kind of got us all involved, and that was 1971. And then we started going back up, and we took tape recorders, and there were 6 of us all together. Well, 5. One of the guys wouldn't go back. He was just kind of frightened. It was pretty hairy to start with. And I tell people, you can go with a fear factor, you got it knocked. Anyway, that got me started, and the 2 brothers, Warren and Lewis Johnson, had been going up there since 1958. So maybe these creatures have been observing them for a while. We don't know, but they came in that one night when the 2 brothers were up there and took the food basically that they had left out on the stove. And at first they thought like it was a bear, a lot of bear up there, but when they finally went outside after it stopped, they noticed a big 5-foot footprint in the mud, and that kind of turned them on to the fact that there's someone with a Bigfoot around here. And that got us all started. So for years we was going up there recording them and trying to trick them, trying to capture a picture or something. All we could capture was their sounds. But they were one step ahead of us, it seems like. We really underestimated what they were at the time, thinking they just don't have a unique animal out there in the woods.
Ron, just looking back, and of course you had these recordings for some time, and we're going to play them here in a minute, but did it ever really occur to you how significant these recordings were and really where it was going to lead you?
I didn't until years later. When the investigative reporter we took up in 1972, he started realizing how important it was, and had the name was Al Berry. And he got the sounds studied by the University of Wyoming by electrical engineer Professor Curling. And he did a year-long study and established the tapes as being genuine. They weren't pre-made or slowed down, speeded up, or anything like that. There was no pre-recording going on with them. So that substantiated the credibility of the tapes. Years later, in 2008, a cryptolinguist got a hold of it. In between that, we tried several different ways to get some more studies done on them, but no one would take it seriously. They couldn't believe that something like this was going on. It's called the Sierra Sounds for the listeners that don't know, and they're quite unique, and we've got some real clear sounds.
And Ron, maybe now would be a good time to just talk about the tapes themselves. Of course, you can pick these up at ronmorehead.com. The clip and the tapes that Ron's referring to are labeled Sierra Sounds or Bigfoot Chatter or even Bigfoot Disagreement. You can find those out at many different outlets. But I'm going to go ahead and re-air it for the listeners that haven't heard this clip. But let's go ahead and listen to this so-called Samurai Chatter or Bigfoot's Disagreement. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the additional research that have been done on these tapes and on this audio clip. And certainly it's always an eerie clip to hear, and I can't imagine what it was like up there on the mountains back then. But, in terms of this tape, Ron, and certainly for those of us that have been researching the phenomenon for many, many years, of course, this falls into that anecdotal category of audio evidence. And I know the tape took a lot of scrutiny over the years, but As you kind of came out from having a professor look at it, was that really enough?
2008, we had a cryptolinguist get a hold of them and discovered that there was a complex language within these sounds that we recorded. That put a real spin on it for me because I'm kind of a spiritual person, believe that our language and that our vocal abilities have something to do with who we are as humans. And these things have a language, at least the ones we dealt with in the Sierras. And I kind of break away a little bit there because I got to say this as a caveat there that there's no, I don't think they're all the same, the ones that are out there. The ones I hear about back east or the ones I hear about even in the Northwest sometimes have different attributes seem like associated with them. Ours were I got to say, they're not just cognizant. Animals can be cognizant, self-aware. These things seem to have sapience, which is something only humans are supposed to have. They're able to figure out and reason things. And that's what we didn't think about at the time. We thought we could put a thread up 6 feet in the air, cross between 2 trees where they was coming in after food, and they would trigger that and we'd get a picture, but they'd go another way.
Now, Ron, when you said that that you feel that there are different species, can you expand on that a little bit? What do you feel that the differences are between these species geographically?
They seem to have different attributes. You've got the ones, I've been in Siberia where the wild man is. I've been all over Nepal too, and there are different reports being made. But
so, Ron, you talked about different attributes. Are you seeing different attributes in these species based upon their geography?
Not so much the geography, just you don't hear that many people reporting the chatter like we've got. Reported vocalizations. You hear about screams and yells and chasing people, and sometimes people missing and they're being eaten. And there's good ones and the bad ones, but I don't think the good and the bad necessarily are determined by one species. I think there could be different species.
The word species, it's always music to my ears, and I know that both you and I have done a ton of research over the years, traveling the world on just the possibility that aliens have visited planet Earth. And, as an ancient astronaut theorist, I have to ask, Ron, do you believe that there's evidence to connect Bigfoot with an alien species?
Depends on how many times you think different types of aliens have been on the Earth. I believe that aliens, in fact, I'm quite sure that aliens have been here. I've seen evidence of them in Peru and Bolivia when I've been down there. And hard facts evidence of hybrid beings, which were not altogether human. And I feel like over the eons that there's probably been quite a bit of intervention in that regard. You got Greek, Egyptian history too, which talks about that, and it gets into the, where you can see the statues over there where they got a dog head on a person, and there's just a lot of mixing going on, and I think has gone on in the past.
Ron, you'd mentioned just kind of some of the hard evidence you witnessed yourself, and I know you've taken some trips down to Peru and other places as well, but maybe you can just kind of share with the listeners kind of what you've seen.
Well, I went down there with L.A. Mazzulli, a team of people that he put together, 6 of us, I guess, something like that, 6 or 8. And a scientist was with us each time, archaeologist, and we examined the elongated skulls that were down there in Caracas and Bolivia also, and flew into Lima and just spun around through South America, looking at, I was there for about a month each time, 2 different years with them, and a different archaeologist was with us each time, and we studied the skulls. A guy named Brian Forrester guided us each time, and he took us to some spots where most people don't get to go to, and we examined the elongation of the skulls and found they were not a form of cranial deformation, which is what the Incas used to cradle board those, when they were youth, the royalty, you're trying to get them elongation. And the ones we studied were non-human. They had no sagittal suture, which we have as humans. They had 1 parietal bone, where we have 2, with a suture, going down to the cranium, to the top of our heads. And the elongation was normal for this culture, whatever it was, and it just wasn't human. It had to be alien intervention. And We think they were responsible for the megalithic structures, which are down there, the big, huge boulders, which some of them weigh over 100 tons, carried for miles, cut like a jigsaw puzzle, put up on top of a mountain, 13,000 feet high, and just you see that stuff and you can't help but believe then that something crazy's going on here that we don't understand.
And before we just kind of come back to things we don't understand, I'm certainly interested in your trip, and I think the listeners would be fascinated as well just to talk about the trip to Peru. And for anybody out there that can ever make that trip, I'd highly recommend it. And talk about, kind of where you traveled to, Ron, and did you get to Cusco? Did you get to Machu Picchu?
Well, flew into Cusco the first trip, and we took a trip over to Ollantaytambo, and that's where you get on the train to go to Machu Picchu. And we got flooded out there, or at least the railroad got flooded out, so we didn't get to go into Machu Picchu, but we've seen some things there for the 3 days we stayed there in Ollantaytambo, and we've seen what this culture had done there. And it was just, I got pictures of it. I got a lot of interesting memories from it. We visited a graveyard way back in nowhere, and where a lot of this rocks had sloughed off this mountainside, and we dug some bones out, which were, well, you're not supposed to do that stuff, but we did it.
Well, that's quite awesome. I suppose you weren't expecting that heading now.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I felt like, we felt like Indiana Jones down there or something, running through that stuff. But there's a lot of grave robbers down in that area. They look for these graves, and I've been to these cemeteries where you see a little mound and a kind of a hole, and a mound and a hole. And there's one cemetery down there 7 miles long. It's a big one, and just get up on this little plateau and look, and that's all you see. It looks like a bunch of grave diggers have been there. They dug up the graves and looking for the artifacts, looking for something to cash in. Mainly the jewelry and stuff that was buried with the being that was buried there. And that's where you find some of these skulls too. But most of those actually were buried in a royalty graveyard, and you don't get in those anymore. They stopped people from going there. In fact, we were there just trying to take a picture and got stopped from that. I got ran off because they don't want anybody. They don't want anybody messing with it in any way. It's hard to get anything out of Peru. It's just really, we couldn't take any DNA out of these skulls or anything. So,
speaking of just elongated skulls and things like sagittal crest of the Sasquatch and potentially or these alien species that may have came down in the ancient past and could have possibly levitated these stones or somehow got these stones up on the hill. It's very interesting to me that you observed, these Paracas skulls and these elongated skulls. And actually, there's a lot of history that, these cultures tried to mimic their gods, or at least that's a theory.
Yeah, well, they did that, we think, to try to mimic the same power that this culture had that was able to move those stones. And we believe that because why else do you cradleboard a head? It's got to be part of the kid. And they only did it to the royalty of the Incas. And we think they were trying to mimic the culture that had those naturally elongated skulls. There's a lot of them, too. It's not like there's one or two. They're all over the place down there. And Paracas especially, there was a museum there that we went into, and it was just full of them. I got pictures of that, and that's one of the ones we studied. In fact, we got permission there to unwrap one of the baby mummies, which came out of a tomb with the mother and father. The mother and father were both non-human, and they had no sagittal sutures, like I mentioned before. And the baby hadn't even been unwrapped yet, so we got permission to wrap it, and we had a forensic guy who forms these, makes copies, basically. We got permission to copy the skull, and it was quite interesting. And we documented everything, and then when we got back, this guy named Joe Taylor, he's out of Texas. He's got a museum there. He made copies for us of these skulls. I carry those to the shows when I talk and conferences when I let people look at them. They're quite unique And the baby didn't have a sagittal suture either, so it was, I guess, half human.
So for those just kind of considering, this alien species and, these humans or these cultures that are elongating skulls, Ron, certainly, the sagittal crest doesn't appear in humans. It certainly has appeared on things like adult male gorillas, etc. But do you think that just the elongation of the Sasquatch skull is just really a misconception? It has nothing to do with the sagittal crest at all. It's just simply an elongation and potentially, and I know this is conjecture and just theory, and we're just talking, but do you think it's possible that this elongation of this alien species, that there's some correlation to the resemblance of what folks see when they see that conical or elongated head of a Sasquatch?
Yeah, it could be. My reason for doing it was just for that, to see if any way, that could connect with Bigfoot up here, because that's what I'm involved in. Because they do have sagittal crests, a lot of them. And that's another reason I say there's different ones, because some of them are reported without a sagittal crest. They've got a round head like we do.
So if we stop and consider just, Sasquatch as an alien species, could it have the intelligence, the misconception of the elongated head, this technology that makes it very difficult to, capture? Maybe it's much more advanced than we are, not just intelligently, but more technologically advanced. Ron, in terms of a description of the creatures, were there any interactions or stories that were reported or things that you're aware of?
What I found out is the Incas have stories of warring with the Aztec and the Mayan in Central America. And I've been there a lot too. And then the Mayans have stories, and the Aztec also, of warring with giants in the north, which took me up to the Lovelock Caves. And there's where you got the Paiutes who claim they warred with cannibalistic giants. And you get into all that, and they were red-haired, supposedly. And anyway, that's what the Lovelock Cave is all about. I don't know if you heard about that or not, but
Yeah, I always found that story fascinating, and I'll probably put something up on the blog regarding that, or on social here in the next couple weeks. But in terms of the Lovelock Caves, and for those out there listening that aren't aware, it's Lovelock, Lovelock caves in Nevada. The Paiute Indians, there was a tribal teacher named Sarah Winnemucca, I believe, but at least she had exterminated this another tribe of red-haired cannibalistic giants, kind of like what Ron was saying. And apparently there is a lot of evidence, after her death about that. So Ron, how many times have you been up there, and what have you uncovered?
I've been there 4 times trying to get the permission to see some of the artifacts that came out of there. All they'll let you see is the Paiute artifacts. They won't let you see anything from the giants that were there. But there are some pictures, that I got a hold of, that shows the difference in the size of them, of their skulls anywhere, and their mandible. Quite a difference in that human. Well, I contacted the BLM. I contacted the museums there both. And all they would tell me is, well, they were robust people. They weren't giants. Well, when you see the mandibles, they're big.
So getting back to some of those stories, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that were documented back then?
Well, Sarah Winnemucca, she wrote a book on the Paiutes, and she claims that she had a dress made out of the hair from one of these giants. But as the story goes, the Paiutes all gathered together because they were killing them and eating them. And they drove them into this cave and killed them as they came out when they set fire to the entrance. So my question is, could some of them have not been there? Could some of them have escaped? There's a lot of stories in the Sierras about these creatures, and I've got one of the stories myself. I've encountered them. But you've got the Minaret Skulls, which Dr. Denton years ago took some Boy Scouts into a place in the Minarets of the Sierra Nevada Mountains. And the mule that they used to pack in the supplies dug up a skull, which was huge. And he sent it off to UCLA, where, guess what? It's lost. It's not there. And Al Berry chased that down, and he couldn't understand how they could just lose something like that. No one else could either. Then you've got the Martindale Mummies, which were found in Yosemite in 1898, I believe it was. I tried to follow those. It was a 7-foot-tall female, and she had a baby, and they were both mummified in a cave in Yosemite. And those were acquired by Ripley's, believe it or not, in 1990, I think 98 or 95. That's where I lost trail. You can't find them now. But the male counterpart would have been 8 foot, they said. And it's called the Martindale Mummies.
Just going back to the Lovelock Caves, Ron, certainly it's a very difficult place to get access to, but are you still pursuing that?
No, I've been there 4 times, and I've been satisfied that they've taken the artifacts out of there that had anything to do with what Paiutes claimed, and they've been taken away, so you can't see them. And there's no reason to go there. I've been there, like I said, 4 times. I was there with M.K. Davis one time and Don Monroe, and they found this huge, looked like a handprint on a big boulder. And the handprint was made with the substance that was on the ceiling, which was what would have happened if it was smoky and it burned. And it looked like a hand, but it could have been an inference because we don't know. I told L.A. Missoula about that, and we went back, and it was gone. Just like gone. I got pictures of it when it was there, and I got pictures of it when it was gone, and it just, who could have gotten permission to take that off, and why would they have taken it off? I can tell you, MK put it on the website. There was a handprint there, and it was going all over everything. That's proof there were giants there. Well, I guess BLM or somebody didn't want that out, so they somehow that got wiped off. And we were trying to figure out how that happened, but never could get to the bottom of that either.
I remember reading something too about, these mummified remains that the tribes kind of had described, and these miners had found them in the caves back in, I think, 1910 or 1911 or something like that. But is there ever been any evidence, or has there ever been anything collected that's still available, or no?
Well, we don't know. There was, it wasn't until 1920. Yeah, all that was discovered in 1911, but it wasn't until 1928, I think it was, before the people got in there with any authority and started mapping some of this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff has been taken out by private people and just carried away and probably sitting in somebody's garage or storage today if there's any of it left. What was there that they did find has been taken away. The Patriot Act says that you can't display Native American artifacts, but the Paiutes claim that they were not Native American. They were not Indians. They were big, hairy, cannibalistic giants. But still, you can't get a hold of the artifacts.
Yeah, I was kind of wondered just about, the guano miners and the different things that, that there's legends that they had extracted or taken things away, if any of those folks ever exist. Yeah.
I'm sure they did, and there's probably some somewhere, but I have no idea how to find it. This is so long ago. Close to 100 years now.
Now, Ron, as you're researching these skulls, is it kind of a back alley work that you need to do, or are these folks that perhaps have raided sites, or are these organizations that make these artifacts and skulls available, or do you kind of have to go on the black or the gray market to research this?
I don't think you can find any. I mean, we haven't been able to find any real ones. The only 2 I've got are the ones that get copies made out of Peru, and they're exact copies, duplicates. I got pictures of those on my website too. Like I say, I take them to places where I speak. I don't know of anybody that's going to turn loose of something like that. And if the government finds out about it, chances are they're going to take them. There's a big, there's a lot of people think there's conspiracy going on with the government hiding this stuff. And I got to tell you, it seems like there really is. You can't seem to get to the bottom of some of this stuff. It just all stops at the Smithsonian or when the government took them away. Now, Men in Black come or something happens. But there's a lot of history of giants in this in the Northwest here, and in the whole continent, all the way up into Alaska. You've got history of giants, and named Jim Barrera, who I spoke with in Georgia years ago. He's got a whole bunch of stuff on newspaper clippings, articles, all kinds of information on giants just here in America, North America. But yet you can't get a hold of any of them. And he swears up and down that Smithsonian has taken them all, and they have. The government has taken them. What they did with them, we don't know, but we assume that Smithsonian got them. Why they hide them only can be assumed, and that's because they don't want, well, what would happen if they exposed all that stuff? It would throw a kink in the Darwinism, it would throw a kink in the religions, it would throw a kink in all the history books had to be rewritten.
Yeah, religion would certainly go out the window, I would think. What are your thoughts on, the Nephilim and the Bible and some of the ties that you see there?
Well, I think there is a tie, and it's because it hooks into Greek mythology also, and it just depends on if you're a spiritual person and want to believe that or not. I happen to be, and I happen to believe it, just because of things I've seen too, and what I've experienced around these creatures. There's something going on that we don't see with our three-dimensional eyes. So do they have an attribute we don't understand? Yes, I think they do. Biblical account of the Nephilim can be really looked into better in the book of Enoch, the 15th chapter, first book of Enoch, which was discovered in Ethiopia. Then more books of that account was covered in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 50s, I think, or 40, whatever it was.
And Ron, can you, for our Sasquatch Syndicate listeners, can you talk a little bit about the Nephilim, what they are, just for our listeners that aren't familiar with that?
Okay, well, the Bible says that the fallen angels, which those that went against God's wish, which was to don't mess around with humans, basically they came down here and bred with human women, and they created giants. These giants were called the Nephilim. And anyway, you get into biblical account of Genesis even, and where fallen angels, they call them. I call them aliens because that's what the same thing. And those giants, that's the reason for the flood, was to wipe them out because they was corrupting the whole human genome. And they were doing that to stop the Savior from coming, which was Christ later on, a couple thousand years later, a few thousand years later. But they were trying to corrupt the human genome because man had been given dominance on this earth. This was his place to be. And God didn't like that, so in his own way, he created a flood. But Noah and his family, Noah was the great-grandson of Enoch, and he was from an uncorrupted genome. That's why he allowed Noah and his boys to go through the flood and start over again, trying to give man another chance. Then you find in Numbers 13, 33, and 34 where the Nephilim were here again. Later, when the children of Israel were going into the land of Canaan, they encountered the Nephilim. This was hundreds of years later, after the flood. So how the Nephilim, if they were destroyed in the flood, how they get here again? They got here the same way they did the first time, fallen angels. Aliens came again and corrupted the human. We're trying to corrupt the human genome again. I used to wonder why would God tell the children of Israel to kill them all? The children, the animals, everything had to go. That sounds like a God that isn't loving to me. Then you look into it, everything was corrupt up there. And that's why he wanted everything destroyed. Because you go up there and start mixing with those people in any way, shape, or form, you can corrupt your genome. And the Savior had to come through an uncorrupted gene. And that's where Christ came from. That's why you get the accounting of his genome in Matthew, the first chapter.
And Ron, you were mentioning just kind of some of the Bible verses, and I know in Genesis 6:4 it talks about that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. Is there any credence to the fact that anything could have survived during the flood and some of these creatures may have not been killed or may have survived in caverns or underground dwellings? That's
in Genesis 6. You kind of believe the Bible. Now, if you don't want to believe that, sure, maybe everything wasn't like that, but it was a catastrophic flood, and you can see how that could have happened quite quickly in Bolivia. 13,000 feet, you can see evidence of a flood. And how that happened? The continents were seem to be raised. You can see from Africa and South America how they could have been split apart. all that took place a long time ago.
So, Ron, can you talk a little bit about the journey? And certainly you started in kind of that flesh and blood camp. And I know you're a spiritual person, and you've looked at, the Nephilim, and then, of course, the tie-ins to, your research down in Peru and looking at, alien intervention and some of that as well. But where are you at with it today?
I started out as flesh and blood and tried to trick them, tried to understand how some of the lights, some of the things we saw up there was just unanswerable. But we thought, well, we just don't know. We're not smart enough to answer it, I guess. But the lights would follow us around. We heard different things. In my book, I write about Voices of the Wilderness. I write about some of the unusual mysteries that went on at our camp and how we couldn't understand them. Like we was alongside our shelter, and you hear this sound going on out there, which sounds like our barrels and all the food we packed in, and all that was being ripped away from the trees. The barrels were, and everything being scattered everywhere. And you look out there later, and nothing's changed. So I don't know how you account for that. Other than their mass hypnosis, they're letting us all hear the same thing, or we're hearing into another dimension, or we're all nuts. I'm not sure how you want to look at it, but that happened. And other things happen up there too, which are unexplainable.
So when you think about these unexplainable events, and I know that you've often said at conferences, this is just science we don't understand. And you've written a book called Quantum Bigfoot that talks a little bit about quantum physics and how that could explain some of these attributes. Of course, as you know, I proposed the theory that, these could just be an alien species that's technologically advanced that has control over things like quantum physics and can use technology to their advantage. But let's just talk about it. What are your thoughts in terms of science we don't understand? And again, for the listeners out there that haven't seen Ron Morehead at a conference, I'd highly recommend his sessions. They're very, very educational and will certainly open your minds.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think it's just something we don't understand. It's just science, and the science happens to be quantum physics. You got classical science, which has got a discipline behind it. They have to have the flesh, the blood, and it's things like different doctors I know look into. They have to stay with the science that they've been trained with. They can't get out of that box, and they lose credibility with their peers.
Right.
And they don't get funded. But I'm not in that box, and quantum physics seems to answer a lot of the mysteries associated with these creatures.
So, can you go into some of the attributes that you think may be attributed to quantum physics, possibly vibration and those kind of things?
Yeah, and they disappear. We all have a vibrational frequency. Everything does, and we live in a three-dimensional light frequency, and once you raise your vibrational frequency high enough, you actually can disappear. You have to go faster than light, which Einstein says you can't. Well, you can't, but energy can, and everything is energy when it gets down to the finite level of the micro world that exists.
In the subatomic world, yeah.
Yeah. So when you get into quantum physics, it's mainly talked about in the micro world, the small world that you don't see, the microwave oven. You don't see how that works, but it works. But if somehow neuroscientists working on this aspect, you can get the micro world to be seen or understood in the macro world we live in, it might become easier for people to understand. It's just hard to get your head around quantum physics, but it's there, nevertheless. There's supposedly 11 dimensions that exist. We live in 3. When Einstein said nothing can go faster than light, he was talking about mass. So once your mass reaches the speed of light, it turns into pure energy. And pure energy can't die. And religion might call that heaven. So when you die, your information passes on, your energy does, into another dimension. Quantum physics calls that dimension, so religion calls it heavens. You got Einstein, you got Tesla, you got so many scientists from 100 years ago that understood all this, that lived with that thought that there is a God, there is other dimensions. They knew that things were different than what you could see with your eyes. But yet you got the scientific world today that seem to live not wanting to even look at that. It's them putting their head in the sand.
So do your theories really, are they centric around vibration? Because in quantum physics, things vibrate, right? So are your theories really centered around simply vibration and perhaps Bigfoot being able to manipulate those vibrations, which in turn would then alter our senses and perhaps throw us off the track of actually finding and seeing one?
Good question. Yeah, I think they do. They're able to somehow, and I don't know if it's their vocal mechanism or how they change their vibrational frequency to disappear, but I've just talked to too many people heartfelt people that I believed, and they said, I saw it disappear. I saw it go into a tree. I saw it disappear. And it wasn't until, I think it's 2009, when my daughter, I saw one. We found his trackway, and his trackway sunk down in the ground. And I think I showed a picture of that quantum at the Pineal last November. But I could not find where that track went. And I'm not really a dummy. I mean, I really looked. I looked up in the tree. Could he jumped in a tree? Could he swung out of here? Could he jumped to a rock? Could he jumped over in this brush? How did he get out of here without leaving a sign? Those trackway just absolutely stopped. And that was my first experience with something like that, even though I've heard about it for years. And I believe that has something to do with their vibrational frequency.
I was reading something. I was reading something too. Just I think it was Scott Carpenter. He was talking about if they could use the vibrational frequency to convert the water vapor in the air, they could turn it into like microscopic prisms, and it would reflect the light away from their bodies. And so, just kind of getting into cloaking, kind of, the different theories around cloaking, and kind of maybe kind of what do you think, Ron?
Well, cloaking is, I mean, you want to call it cloaking, but that's actually physical. They've got that out now. You can get, in fact, I got a picture of it. You can put this blanket around you, and it reflects the light from around you, and it looks like you're not there. I mean, you can't see it. That's technology that's been around for a few years now. I'd like to get one of those blankets. You don't have one of those. It's not fair, you know.
Yeah, I think I saw a Japanese scientist on YouTube. He had something like that. It was pretty interesting. It looked like the Harry Potter invisibility cloak or something like that.
Yeah. But, you know, it all gets into, I think, into quantum physics and all your interdimensional aspects of these things. I look at your site now about the rabbit hole. It's cloaking consciousness, electromagnetic fields, all this stuff, telepathy, ghosts and spirits. It all falls into a dimension we're not seeing. And we just can't see, and this will get into the pineal gland now, because we can only see with our two eyes unless we have access to our pineal gland. And if you want to get into that, that's how we get our mind speak, our telepathy, our...
And I know, there's a lot of science around the pineal gland, and part of it is how it is affected by magnetic fields. But I would love to hear what you have to say about the pineal gland, and also just say one thing, Ron. It really resonated, I know, with both Chuck and I. Anybody who's been around the subject for a while and as a researcher, you really hit that point to where you're thinking it's an ape, just a flesh and blood ape, and then you start hearing, like you said, tracks disappearing, it cloaking, and just having these different attributes. So, yeah, definitely down the rabbit hole. I think we've all have had that feeling. But, yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the pineal gland and perhaps how that may help or enable an individual to perhaps have a sighting of Bigfoot.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the original way man was made, to connect with that third eye. The Egyptians call it the seat of the soul. It's been called that for a long time. It's what can see everything. It's connection with God. Call it that. It's connection with the collectiveness that's we're all part of. And if you can connect with that, the problem is we've all calcified it. We can't connect with it. And basically, that's how we originally designed, was to connect with that and to flow with oneness, like birds do in a flock, like animals are flowing with a oneness, and I think Bigfoot can flow with a oneness.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems that the pineal gland is just another sensory organ. It's actually, located roughly in the center of your head. And Ron, you mentioned the calcification of the pineal gland. It's interesting that it is so rampant, pineal gland calcification, that they actually use the pineal gland, because it is so calcified, when they are doing x-rays to determine whether or not you have a brain tumor, because it will then push that pineal gland left, right, or disorient it from where it actually should be.
Well, I suggest to all your listeners that everybody should try to decalcify that, because the more you can make that clean, the more connection you'll have with everything. I mean, you'll know things, you'll pick up things, you'll get a sense that Aunt Mary's fixing to call, and she'll call. Those things happen when you get that thing clear. Do that through your diet. The biggest culprit in calcification of the pineal gland is fluoride, basically, and eating the non-GMO foods. You need to get these antioxidants and things going. Fluoride in your tap water, you've got that everywhere almost. There's things, anybody can go on a website and find, just look up decalcifying the pineal gland. It'll give you all kinds of foods to eat and what not to eat. Because we've all got it, and it's just because of our culture. I say we all got it. I'm sure Bigfoot doesn't use fluoride in his toothpaste. So I've got a feeling that they're probably on top of it better.
I've seen too, like I've seen just reports too about that sixth sense, the hair standing up on the back of your neck. You're out in nature, you're not as connected when your pineal gland's calcified, and so I just find that very interesting.
I call that quantum entanglement, and you can entangle. That's how it happens. That's how mind speak happens. That's how so much of the telepathy happens. People seem to be able to tell the future, things like that. Well, time only exists for us in this three-dimensional world. We can only go through time a day at a time as we go forward. We don't go backwards, we look forward. We're out in space, it's different, and the whole universe is different. That gets off the pineal gland, but still, if you can decalcify your pineal gland, you'll have a lot of knowledge that you don't have now. And also, your vibrational, it's mainly responsible for creating melatonin, which allows you to sleep better. So the absence of light is what stimulates the pineal gland, stimulates your sleep. So when you sleep at night, your vibrational frequency lowers, and that's when you can couple with that, what I'm trying to say here, but what I'm getting, bottom line is here, a lot of encounters happen at night when there's no light. And it could be because of vibrational frequencies coupling in.
Ron, is there any correlation in your mind between the pineal gland and perhaps infrasound?
No, I don't think so. Infrasound is something you can record, and it does definitely have an effect on humans. Whether or not they were using infrasound with us, we don't know, because there's times when we were frozen up there, not cold frozen, but I mean, you couldn't move. I couldn't move, and neither could the guy that was with me. We just was going right up to a tree where we felt like one of these things were, and we thought we was going to see it run out because it was bright moonlit night. And 8,400 feet is where our camp is, and you can read a newspaper 8,400 feet in the Sierras. But it didn't run off. But we both got froze before we got to the tree. We weren't talking to each other. We were just walking up there, and all of a sudden, like walking into a Star Trek force field or something. Couldn't move. And I mentioned this later on to a scientist, and he says, well, we don't like to hear about your feelings. And I said, well, it really wasn't a feeling. It was just something we couldn't move through. And we weren't afraid at that time. We wouldn't have been walking up there. We had already come accustomed to them not going to hurt us, we didn't think, and we hadn't been carried away in our sleeping bag like Osman, so we were getting kind of friendly with them, we thought, but we were frozen, and we couldn't move forward, but we could go backward, and that's what we did. That's happened.
Now, do you think that's a characteristic of infrasound, or exactly what do you think that is?
Well, that's what the scientist was telling me. He said, well, it has to be the infrasound or or pheromones. But pheromones only works within the same species. Infrasound can work, that's different. But now, if these things are part human, and I believe some of them probably are part human, how much human do you have to be to pass the pheromone on, to attract something or affect something? I don't know. I would choose infrasound if I was choosing something, or quantum entanglement.
Ron, what about orbs or lights in the forest? Have you had any experiences with that? Have you studied that, or do you have any theories about that?
What I know is nothing, but what I think is something else. I think orbs are like satellites that can go down and spy on you. We had orbs up there. You have orbs pretty common in a lot of places. Up at the Montana Vortex in Montana, Joe Hauser's place up there. We photograph them up there. You can get out there with a camera and actually, you won't see them with your eyes, but your camera lens will pick them up. It's the light spectrum again. And there's one I zoomed in on, and it had the actual, looked like a Mayan calendar or something. It was so interesting. But orbs, I think, are like spy satellites, UFOs maybe. They're just all over. Or maybe they're little people. I don't really know. But I know they're out there, and there's something you don't normally see with your eyes, but cameras will pick them up, and sometimes you see them out of the corner of your eye because the corner of your eye will pick up light frequencies that your normal vision won't.
Yeah, I often wondered if that's, some, again, a dimensional aspect of either quantum physics or maybe even string theory. And I think you mentioned earlier, like there's 11 dimensions in quantum physics, and I think, what is there, 26 now in string theory or something like that. But I always just find it very interesting because I've heard all these stories about, orbs and lights being around where potentially a Sasquatch may materialize, or maybe it's a spirit and all these different things. I was just really interested, just kind of what you had heard.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really researched into orbs all that much, but
sure, yeah.
I just think that they're so obvious everywhere. I mean, you can almost pick them up anywhere you go if you got a camera.
Right.
So we'd had some orbs or some type of a light following us around up there at the mountains. In fact, this last summer I was up there in July. Went up there and we had a light go by us, which was unaccounted for. I have no idea what it was. It wasn't going fast, but it was actually kind of a little elongated light. It wasn't round. And we was just laying there looking, and all of a sudden this thing just goes right through the trees, right around, in and out of the trees. And I have no idea what that was all about, but I thought it was going to come right at us for a while, but it didn't. It went away. But now that was with our regular eyes, so I have no idea if that was an orb or just what accounts for that.
So, Ron, let's go ahead and talk about your book, Quantum Bigfoot, and certainly it's very new. And for the listeners out there, you can find all of Ron's books and recordings at ronmorehead.com. He does have a really extensive shop out there. So if you want to pick up a hardback or a PDF to download, I'd certainly recommend it. And maybe, Ron, you can just kind of share a little bit about the book and what you're working on.
Well, Al Berry, the investigative reporter that we took up there in 1972, really started all of this, made us realize just how significant this was. He told me that you got to have the science behind it, so that's why he had the study done at the University of Wyoming, who was always beating the bushes trying to find someone else that would take this seriously and do something with it. He passed away in 2012, by the way, and became a good friend of mine, but he said, you need the science. So there's no classical science that really answers the enigmas associated with these reports that I get and what's happened to me. So that kind of leads you into quantum physics, which takes over when classical science fails. Let's say fails. When you reach the speed of light, classical science stops and quantum science starts. And that's when you get into real-world stuff. According to Stephen Hawking, your information doesn't die, so where does it go? Energy is what everything at this micro level is made from and out of. So we're just housing these bodies here.
Yeah, I'd say I wish I had a better one. I always say I need. I'm gonna laugh someday about my human form.
Well, it's an interesting life. I've had a very interesting life, and it's still going on. I'm still in good shape, but I've experienced a lot of things. And what I do know is we're not seeing everything with our two eyes that we have in our forehead. The pineal gland that you're going to see things with and understand things with. And that's something that you can't get classical science to jump into very well. Those are the same thing. How do you see things from a different spot? You do all that with the pineal glands opened up. And you actually open it up, actually, not just with diet, but with meditation. You need to be quiet and just meditate. And, it's very important. Religion calls that prayer. I say prayer is asking God for something. I say meditation is listening to God. There's a difference, I think. Well, I like to just be still and listen. And then things come to you. You notice sometimes you get the right answers you've probably been working on early in the morning after you've had a good night's sleep. The answer will come to you. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and the answer comes to me. It's just relaxing and allowing the oneness that's out there to become part of you. And if you want to get biblical about this, that's what Christ talked about. He said, everything I'm doing, you can do. Now, think about that. Are any of us walking on water? We're not walking on water. We're not really raising people from the dead, are we? But he said we can do all that stuff. And how do you do that if you don't get into quantum physics? I think quantum physics and spirituality are one and the same. And I get into that. I get into what Einstein said 100 years ago, and science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And you got Einstein that said that thing, and then you got Tesla saying just about the same thing. God's miracles are quantum physics. So there's a way we can do things, and we're not reaching our potential. Some Bigfoots are supposedly good. Biblically, they're called guardian angels, and they may be trying to tell us something through the pineal gland, through that inner feeling that we'll have, and that will give us information that we need. And if we just learn to listen to that, we'll be able to do the right thing.
Yeah, some on the government conspiracy too around the pineal gland and the, like you said, the calcification and the fact that there's fluoride in our water and in our toothpaste and all these different things, and it's kind of that government sense of control that they don't also want us to be in touch with these different things. Have you heard about that as well?
I have. Yeah, I think. Well, a lot of people think there's a government cover-up, and a lot of people think that maybe the government's even made some of these creatures. That's what Hitler was actually working on a super warrior. I've heard a story, and don't know, I've never been able to vet it, but there's a whole bunch of these things been made by the government that mess around the DNA of primates and trying to make a super warrior with sentience and with sapience. So I've heard also that they've gone away, that maybe they're not doing everything. They can't control them. So that may be the bad ones we're hearing about out there. I don't know. That's just a theory. It's somebody. I've actually had three different people tell me that didn't know each other. One of them claims that she was a little girl when her father was. They lived close to a facility that was working with these things, and she used to play with the Bigfoot. And we had to go back to this government enclosure thing at night. But her dad had this radio which tuned into certain frequency, which would call it or send it away. So there you have frequency coming into play again.
Hey,
is there a government cover-up? I think there very well could be. Again, look how it would scare everybody if everybody really knew what was going on.
Ron, I think it's kind of just kind of well documented too. Like I think your daughter had some pretty decent experiences, and they were talking a little bit about just kind of the the energy of a child and kind of not as being as calcified as an adult and having more interactions with children versus adults and those creatures. Have you kind of heard that as well, or is that a theory of yours?
Yeah, I think they have very curious about humans. At least some of them are, because you hear about them watching campfires and stuff like that. My daughter saw them 3 times. She's up at close to our camp and at our camp. And I think they may have something going on, wanting her. She was going up there when she was younger, but she she's had experiences as she got older too. And I don't know. I wonder sometimes if it's the calcification of the pineal gland, where they're able to communicate with you better, or if they can quantum entangle you anyway because of an attribute they have, an alien intervention. I don't know. I just know that she's had some. Well, we was laying outside one night in sleeping bags with a tarp over us, and she had a hand on her, a big hand on her stomach, and she just knew that we was having this stuff going on. She knew that if she opened her eyes, that she couldn't open her eyes. She just couldn't. And don't know what to think about that, but that's not one of her sightings. That's just something that happened. And other things like that have happened. We've had some interesting adventures together, her and I. It's Rhonda, named after me. Guess what?
Right. Yeah, I guess, it's kind of, the more you know about the subject, the less you understand. And certainly Paul and I, we're getting to the point where we've heard a lot of stuff at this point. And I guess, if you start looking at the interdimensional camp and the alien camp, it's almost as if, could it be an interdimensional creature that uses science like quantum physics to, come in and out of our reality? Or could it be an alien that has the technology to do so? And I guess that's kind of where the struggle is right now when you start trying to dissect the attributes of those two camps. I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, or could it be both? Again, I don't think there's just one type. I do think there's different kinds. Some of them may be from alien origin. Some of them may be the better one.
Just kind of going back, I know we're into this an hour, but you've been doing this for, I guess, going on 45 plus some years, talking about, these different subjects, and you're kind of my version of the real life Indiana Jones out there, going out and seeing all these different things. Can you kind of just talk a little bit about your legacy and kind of how you want to be remembered in the field of research and all the different things you've tried to pursue along the way?
I think it's what I'd like to be remembered by is that I brought something to light for people, known as someone that helps somebody become aware of the spirituality that we have and who we are and who we are made in the image of, how special humans are.
Yeah, for sure. And, certainly goes without saying, but we really appreciate your work and everything you've done so far. So Ron, thanks again for coming on Sasquatch Syndicate. We really do appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you there at an upcoming event.
All right. Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care, buddy.
This concludes our May 2017 podcast series. Sasquatch Syndicate will return on Thursday, June 1st. Thanks to all our listeners and those that have been out to our website and those following us on social media. Sasquatch is a controversial subject, so for all the believers and disbelievers and those that will tell you they have all the answers, just remember we're flying through space at 700 miles per hour. Buckle up.